Welcome to Fire University. This is a podcast dedicated to fire ecology and management within the Natural Resource University Podcast Network. My name is Dr. Marcus Lashley. I'm a wildlife biologist, an assistant professor of disturbance ecology at the University of Florida, and a lifelong hunter that's passionate about wildlife conservation and management. In this podcast, I will interview scientists and professionals, not only on the latest research in fire ecology, but also about their experiences, in hopes that you as the listeners can learn why fire ecology is important and also how you can use it to meet your natural resource management goals. So let's get to the burning questions in Fire University. Hey everybody, welcome to the first episode of Fire University. Today I have a special guest. It's Charlotte Nowak, and she's the communications specialist that's going to be behind the scenes, so to speak, editing and trying to fix all the mistakes that I make, and everybody else in Natural Resource University. She's going to be doing all of that. So how are you doing today, Charlotte?
I'm doing well, Marcus. Thank you for having me here, and I'm pretty excited to be a part of the team, part of the Natural Resource University Network, and I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, we're excited to have you. I know I've made a mess of things already, and you've been trying to clean it up, so I really appreciate that, and I think it's a hard job, and you're, not always noticed since you're back in the behind the scenes. So we're going to put you in the forefront in the first episode.
Oh, boy. So to start off, though, Marcus, why don't we tell the listeners a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are now?
Sure. So I grew up in Alabama, and, I have a long history of agriculture in my family. And because of that, I've been around natural resources my entire life. My granddaddy and dad both fostered my love for hunting, and that really got me passionate about wildlife conservation. So that's how everything kind of coalesced in my childhood to lead me down this path to where I am now. And I've always kind of had a knack for being a scientist, I guess. My mom used to hate the little experiments that I was doing when I was a kid. I mean, I had fish in tanks where I was doing these diet trials and bringing stuff home in my boot, all kinds of stuff that was kind of ridiculous now to think about. But, I was pretty well hardwired to be a scientist. And natural resources, what I was passionate about. So I became a natural resources scientist, and that's where I am now. So I went to Mississippi State University for my undergrad, and I got a dual degree in forestry and wildlife management. They have a dual degree option there. And that was perfect for me because, I'm from the South. I figured I'd probably be working in the South. Most of the South is private land ownership, and most of it's forested. And so I thought, man, if I'm going to be managing wildlife populations in the South, I'm probably going to be managing forests. So that's kind of what I was thinking when I did that. And then I got really, really lucky and found the perfect master's program with Craig Harper at the University of Tennessee. He'll be a guest on the podcast, hopefully regularly, but at least in one upcoming episode. And during my master's, I was in upland hardwood systems up in the southern Appalachians in eastern Tennessee, and I was evaluating different silvicultural treatments, so basically different ways that you could thin or cut your forests for private landowners, and also how using fire in combination with those different things could affect habitat quality for white-tailed deer and wild turkey in particular. So all of this is stemming, again, from my childhood. When I was growing up, I had this passion for hunting. I mean, my parents couldn't keep me out of the woods and didn't want to, which was really good. So, that kind of led me down this path. And, recognizing that most of the Southeast is privately owned, most of those landowners are interested in managing resources for the wildlife that they're pursuing, the game species. I've kind of taken a focus on game species management with fire because both of those are so important in driving the decisions and the the way that we would manage the properties for those species. So that's kind of what led me down that path. So I took a break from academia for a year and worked with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and that's when I really fell in love with managing open pine systems with fire. I mean, I was setting stuff on fire like 3 days a week in that job. It was really awesome. So I was a wildlife biologist
/ pyromaniac.
Yeah, well, the pyromaniac has always been there, even when I was a kid. So I've always been like that, though, really motivated and focused on the things that I was interested in. And I really got passionate about managing the systems that are really common in Florida and a lot of the southern coastal plain. So I have a background in upland hardwoods and in open pine systems, but I grew up in Black Prairie in Alabama, so I have a lot of experience just, working in that system from living there for a large portion of my life. Yeah, that led me to seek out academic programs further and found a PhD program at North Carolina State University, and it was perfect again. It was looking at fire ecology and open pine systems, how it affected white-tailed deer and wild turkey and fox squirrels, and their interactions with predators, which were coyotes in that system. So a lot of cool research that I got to be involved with for my PhD program, and that led into a postdoc, which finally led me back to Mississippi State, where some of our listeners have probably heard me before. I've been on Deer University, another podcast in the Natural Resource University network. I don't know, probably 30 episodes or more now. So they probably heard of me from that. So I was with the MSU Deer Lab as a faculty member for 4 years before moving to the University of Florida, where I now am. And I'll be the director, I guess, of the UF Deer Lab. In this case, DEER is actually an acronym, and it stands for Disturbance, Ecology, and Ecological Restoration, which brings us back to Fire University and this topic area and what my specialty is, which is really managing wildlife habitat with disturbances like forest, manipulations through silviculture and also through fire, obviously.
That's awesome. So we're going to most likely be having a lot of listeners then that are looking to manage their own natural resources, whether it's 100 acres of upland hardwoods or whether it's general wildlife management on their properties. What are the listeners looking to kind of expect from this podcast?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're probably going to talk about fire.
What?
I don't know if you realize that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So if the ones that are familiar with me from Deer University know that I was always the dude that brought up fire in every episode.
Again, pyromania.
Yeah, I just kind of get, I guess I get excited about that topic, and there was enough feedback, honestly, from episodes and the content that we were putting out, and specifically some of the fire management stuff that I was putting out, that it kind of gave us the idea that, we should have one that's more specific to fire ecology.
So people are requesting this information from the episodes that you were on.
Yeah, we were getting a lot of great feedback, and, that's part of my role as a, an extension specialist at the university. So I have the role, as developing new knowledge through research, but also disseminating that knowledge not only in the classroom to students, but also to the general public. So that's what I'm really passionate about doing that. And I feel like if I'm going to do research on these topic areas, I need to make sure that people know about it, whether they're in a classroom or sitting in their truck.
Yeah. So you had mentioned in the introduction that you're going to be conducting interviews with other research scientists about things that are either relevant to what's going on or just previous research studies that they've done. Mm-hmm. But you're also conducting your own research right now. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, so that's the general structure that I'm kind of envisioning for the podcast, like you said, where I'm we're calling it Fire University because we are focused on delivering scientific, validated information to people, and that's what I'm trying to do here. And some of that's coming from my own lab. Some of it is, just from professionals, other researchers around. There's a lot of great fire ecology research. It's not always going to focus on on wildlife management necessarily. I'll probably bring it back to that because of my interest and my expertise. But a lot of the people that have already agreed to come on the show don't specialize in managing wildlife resources. They're looking at other ecosystem functions or processes. But yeah, so that'll probably drive the topic areas that we'll cover is who I'm interviewing, but also, I'll bring in some of the stuff that's going in my lab. So, for example, I just had a couple of graduate students that finished, and Rainer Nichols and Weston Thompson in particular just finished looking at how the timing of fire affected several species, actually. Rainer was focused more on deer and turkey. Weston was focused on deer and gopher tortoises. So a little bit strange there. But the idea behind those projects was that we could change the time of the year that we lit a fire, and it would change the way that those species interacted with the fire. So just to give you some examples, if you burn during March, for instance, and compare that to burning in June, the timing of plants responding to that, which plants respond, and then how deer or turkey or gopher tortoises respond to that fire then change. And we're trying to figure out, can timing alone change the implications of lighting the fire to begin with? Not all fires are created equal. So that's kind of the idea, right? I mean, that really is. So they were master students, and they were looking, really at that question from an applied angle. How can we mobilize that information to better manage properties for those species?
And good information for private landowners that are trying to do the same exact thing on their own
exactly.
lands. Yeah.
And the gopher tortoise is a species of conservation concern, so it's really important to understand how we can better manage habitat. And something that's been understudied is the role that timing of fire plays in that. But also, most of the people that contact me are really interested in fire because they like deer, turkeys, or quail, or some combination thereof. And, a lot of my funding that I use to carry out these research projects stems from funding on those species. So, I do a lot of research on those as well. And same kind of thing, if most of the landowners are interested in those species, that's my avenue to deliver.
Kind of drive the research.
Yeah, I'm delivering relevant information to those people. And, I'll just acknowledge that my goal is to conserve wildlife as a whole better, and that if that's the conduit that gets fire to be used in these southern systems where almost all of the species, at least all the ones that are of conservation concern, need fire. And if that's the conduit to help me get people burning more, regardless of what their objective is, that's probably a good thing for most species. So that's kind of the driving idea. I also have some students. One, a PhD student, is doing a little more advanced ecology work, but it still has a lot of application in it. And David Mason is currently working with the Tall Timbers Research Station, several scientists there, and we kind of had this awesome idea. So a lot of my research has shown that when you burn, you have this distinct period for depending on the species, somewhere between 6 and 16 weeks, you have this magnet effect. So essentially, you burn an area, and then basically the entire community of wildlife all use it extensively for that short time period.
Similar to like a whale fall almost in the ocean.
I don't know about that as much, but yeah, the same kind of thing. That's a huge resource that's been made available, and there's an extreme attraction from an entire community of species. Fire kind of does the same thing. So you burn, not only do you remove plant material and it sets back succession, moves plants back down into the reach of herbivores that are at the forest floor, but it also exposes seeds that are sitting around. It kills insects. I don't know if you've ever been 1 inch tall and needed to eat insects to grow really fast, but quail and turkey poults do. And it's much easier to catch a dead grasshopper that's been cooked. than it is a live grasshopper when you're really small like that. So this resource, I guess, is being released for all these species, and they all seek it. So what David is looking at is this idea that, we attracted to this recent fresh burned area, we attracted all this community, and all those things are eating seeds in their environment. So in essence, they're not only responding to our habitat management, but they're bringing habitat with them, because they disperse seeds into that area that's really awesome place for those, plants to get established. And those plants are ultimately going to be the habitat response that we're looking for the wildlife species to begin with. It's more complex and really interesting, but, we can definitely operationalize that to make it applicable to land management as well.
Yeah. So seeing if there's a bit of a shift in the species that are getting brought by those animals flocking in to get those resources. So we might expand a little bit outside of just the basic fire ecology within this podcast. I actually had a thought this morning, which I meant to ask you in the lab before we came down here, but fire management is obviously something that is pretty common nowadays. Why is it so much more important now that we manage our forest resources? And, back, say, before humans, we obviously didn't have humans coming in, lighting small prescribed fires throughout the woods. Why is it necessary now, and what's the difference from before?
So, that's a great question, and one that I get pretty often. So if we go way back, lightning was igniting fire. And we know we can look at suites of species in the southeastern U.S. I mean, most plant communities, not all of them, but most of the plant communities, especially the really dominant ones like longleaf, even the upland hardwood systems, the prairie systems, certainly, they all have species of plants in it that have very strong adaptations for fire, which indicates that fire was something that happened commonly. And the wildlife species that we manage in the South also have a suite of adaptations, like the magnet effect. I mean, that really is an adaptation, right? The wildlife know when you burn, there's going to be resources there. Even in cases like this is just like an innate response. Even in cases where I've done research on places that the landowners are in their 80s and they don't know that this ever burned in their lifetime, right? Their property. We had one example, and I've talked about it several times because it made a big impression on me, because I really love turkey hunting. If you've never heard a turkey gobble right in your face, then you don't really know what I'm talking about. But I've had a few, and it's ruined my life. So really passionate about turkey hunting. So this particular instance made a big impression on me because of that. But we had these 1 acre burn patches on this property, and we replicated it a bunch of times, and we were looking at some things. Mariah Bogus was a student in my lab that just recently graduated, and we were doing some research, and he was really interested in deer. So we were looking at deer responses to these 1 acre patches, and I never will forget, it was the opening day of turkey season the next morning. On, I think it's March 14th, we set these 1 acre blocks on fire, and then I came back that evening to check on it just to make sure the fire was out and clean up or whatever. And a big tom gobbler had roosted in the smoke in that burned area.
And tom gobbler is a type of turkey?
Yeah, male turkey.
Okay.
So that's the one you're looking for if you're hunting turkeys.
Okay.
The one that gobbles in your face, hopefully. Yeah, so that made a big impression on me because of a few things. One, the landowner knows that place has never burned in the recent past. There's no way that turkey knew what, to look for the smoke. The other thing is we had been monitoring all that space with cameras. So we know that the turkeys had not been there in a long time. Like, we had months without turkey observations. And then we burned, and literally while it was still smoking, after it had gone out that compelled that gobbler to come and roost in that area.
He's got an innate hardwire inside
Yeah,
of him.
so it's
Yep.
like, I don't even, like, they don't smell very well, so he must have seen the smoke and is like, yep, I'm going to be in that in the morning. So he went and roosted in it, just basked in the warm smoke or whatever. Yeah, so it was pretty interesting.
Perks of the job, getting these cool interactions.
Yeah, that's really fun to me, especially a lot of the research that I do relies on camera trapping to, basically a trail camera for most people that are listening to this, but for a researcher, we call it a camera trap. So, getting to see the cool interactions and, really my job, I'm getting paid to think, right? I'm thinking about these things and trying to construct how these processes work, and then turn that into something that people can use on their property to better manage resources. So I don't remember how we got onto that. We got sidetracked from your original question. So we know a lot of the plant species in the South have been dependent on fire. We know if you look at lightning strikes actually in the U.S., that you can Google search this, just look for the lightning strikes, and you can see this really distinct pattern. And you'll notice that plant communities also follow that pattern pretty well. And something that's also really cool, and I always use this in my classroom because it really illustrates the point that I'm trying to make in wildlife habitat management. If you map out the distribution of northern bobwhite, it mirrors the lightning strike distribution almost perfectly. That's pretty awesome to me.
Interesting.
And it's just showing how important fire is to that species. And we use it sort of as a sentinel, like a canary in the coal mine, so to speak.
So are we having less lightning strikes now?
No, actually, we're having more.
Okay.
But so if we think about it in the context of the historical distribution of these plant communities, the plant material, whether it's leaf litter or the actual plants that are alive still, depending on the system, they're the fuel for the fire. And when lightning would strike, it would set these plant communities on fire. And historically, before humans were involved, that might have been that, you might have had longleaf, a lightning strike set fire in Louisiana, and that could have burned to North Carolina. And it may have taken months, and it would go in and out and rain and, natural fire shadows. So you'd have this really awesome matrix. Of course, not every fire that was lit would burn that much. You might have some, actually some of the research indicates that lightning strike fires normally are less than an acre. But there was the potential for that to happen, and we get so many lightning strikes, it probably happened relatively frequent.
And now we've got populations and cities and houses and things that we don't want to get lit on fire.
We have all kinds of fire breaks. Yeah. And I'm trying to get some folks on that do dendrochronology or some sort of backdating like that. There are a couple of really great researchers that I'm trying to get on the show to talk about this. But we can actually get a glimpse of what the fire history looked like before, at least before European settlement. And in some of the systems in the southeast, they were burning as much as twice a year, a given place. That wasn't on average. On average, for like longleaf, it was more like a 3-year return interval. In some places in Florida, a 2-year return interval, and maybe even a little faster in a few small spots. But my point is, most of the southeast was burning pretty frequently when it was just driven by lightning, and we didn't have all the fire breaks in place.
So now we're just trying to replicate what nature does, just in a more manageable way, now that we have a higher population of humans and things that we don't want to get caught on fire.
The other thing is, we like a lot of the things that fire produce, but in general, humans are afraid of fire. And we went over several decades, probably close to a century, of this pretty aggressive campaign to suppress fire. And
which just makes things overgrow.
Yeah, so you basically just have these fuel buildups. Luckily, in the South, the decomposition rate is pretty high, and we have conditions that in most places don't lead to catastrophic wildfire. So we've got a lot of things playing in our favor here that for instance, out west, they may not necessarily have in their favor. I was out west here recently, and I saw an area that had been burned, like a catastrophic burn. I forget now how long it was, but it was probably close to 20 years, and all the
wow.
trees were still standing dead.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that tree would be down in 2 months in Florida. So,
Oh, so a big part of it is just the tree species that are out in the west versus the
well,
southeast.
there are definitely different tree species, but it's really about the fuel accumulation.
Mm-hmm.
That things just decay at a far slower rate out there, so you end up with this buildup really quickly, and it can lead to some big problems if you couple it with other issues that are ongoing. Yeah, and I'll try to get people on that have an expertise out west to talk about that. I think that's definitely an interesting and relevant conversation to have.
Yeah, definitely to see the contrast of the environment that we are in here in northern Florida versus probably a much drier condition out west.
So we had fire suppression, for several decades, and then we started having research showing how important it is, and things like the northern bobwhite that are really closely related to fire started declining pretty
when
rapidly.
Did that information start coming out about the importance of burning?
The initial stuff was probably in the 20s and 30s when that research. So there was like the Stoddard plots.
Mm-hmm.
Stoddard was one of the folks that really started pushing the idea that fire was really important. Aldo Leopold had a role in that for sure. Several people like that started acknowledging it, and it took a while for it to kind of catch hold, but by the 70s and 80s we had a pretty good handle that fire is pretty essential to a lot of the communities. If you take fire out of longleaf, it succeeds to something that's not longleaf. Mm-hmm. Fire is essential to keep that plant community, an open pine savanna structure that's necessary in that system. And not only that, if you go and actually look at the wildlife of conservation concern, the ones that are declining or not doing well, in the southeast in particular, but in the eastern United States, really, anything east of the Mississippi, a large majority of those species are at least fire adapted, if not, fire dependent species. So fire is a pretty important process in our part of the world, and many other parts of the world as well, but definitely in this part of the U.S.
Yeah. Well, and that's exciting that we're going to have so many awesome experts to come on and talk to us about it. But real quick, we've kind of rambled on and on, but earlier in the introduction for this podcast, you mentioned a network called Natural Resource University. Can you expand a bit on that for our listeners and explain what that network is?
Sure. Yeah, so this all started with Bronson Strickland at the MSU Deer Lab with Deer University, and I started getting involved with Bronson, and of course was on their show dozens of times. Mm-hmm. And when I found out I was coming to Florida, Bronson and I had some conversations about potentially me starting my own podcast up, and then we actually found some funding, and lo and behold, there were a couple of other extension specialists at Purdue and Iowa State that at the same time we were kind of talking to those guys, and one of them had actually emailed Bronson within days of some of those conversations, and it just kind of all worked out that we were able to find some funding through the NEFA program with the Renewable Resources Extension Act. And the idea behind that funding is to take, or for that particular request for funding, was to take the extension model, which is basically take research and get it to the general public, our constituents, to think about the model for delivery in a different way, in a more novel, more technological way. And we pitched this idea that we could take Deer University and also develop other podcasts on natural resource areas, which is what that funding is for, and with a multi-state effort. So we have Purdue University and Iowa State University, and then Mississippi State University and University of Florida all came together with us, and we kind of brainstormed what areas did we want to cover. So Bronson's going to continue Deer University with Steve Damaris as co-host, and then there will be Habitat University that Jared Brook will lead at Purdue University, and then Adam Janke will co-host from Iowa State. Then we'll also have one on pond resource management, which Mitch Zitsky will be the lead on. And the idea was that we could put all these efforts together into a network, which is becoming more common, it seems like, in the podcasting world, is to have several podcasts, not necessarily hosted by the same person, but sometimes they are, where they're all in a network and more easily accessible to people. Yeah. So that was the idea, is that we could try to cover the science behind natural resource management and all these different subdisciplines, hopefully to become a one-stop shop, for podcasting on science-based information for these different resources. So that's what I'm talking about when I say Natural Resource University. That's the name of the network, and we're going to have those areas, and hopefully we're going to expand that. We're talking to other people about having other topic areas covered. So
it's really taking extension work and evolving it as our technological times evolve as well, and really getting that information out to as many viewers and listeners as possible through these networks.
We've had such great feedback, and I hear from Bronson regularly. He's just overwhelmed by the response, the positive responses from the listeners of Deer University, and we're trying to create that, and just elevate it in more natural resource areas. So
awesome. Well, hopefully we can deliver on our end of that with Fire University.
Yeah, I'm hoping so. And I've already invited quite a few professionals and researchers on the show, and have several really awesome people lined up to talk to. So I'm really excited about that, and I'm hoping our listeners will be as excited about it as I am.
Well, I guess that wraps up our first episode 1 of Fire University.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on the show, and hopefully we'll have you on much more, so you won't just have to deal with our mess on the back end.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks everybody for listening. Fire University is part of the Natural Resource University podcast network, funded by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you like what you heard today in this episode, please follow us on all the social media platforms at UF Deer Lab.